Good morning and welcome to another review of another short story out of Red as Blood or Tales from the Sisters Grimmer by Tanith Lee here in this beautiful door edition, which I owe to Rob from L Space for giving me this edition. In other news, myself, Rob and Chris from Liminal Spaces are going to be discussing the first story in this book, Paid Piper, either tomorrow or later today. I'm not sure. One of those things. But today I'm talking about the 8th story in this compilation. It's called Black as Ink, and its subtitle says it's from Scandinavia, the 20th century. Now, this is one odd story. I mean, why am I even saying that, right? Tanith Lee, of course it's an odd story. What else would it be? This is an odd story, and it's unsettling and inconclusive. So, it was published in 1983. It is widely considered by the internet at large to be a retelling of Swan Lake. I've seen Swan Lake many times, normally in terms of ballet. My mother loved ballet, and I know the story. This is only Swan Lake in that there is indeed a lake and potentially a swan, potentially. It's also very, very odd. So it starts with a young man called Victor. Victor is staying in a chalet with his mother and his uncle. And we get this sense of departed glory because this chalet is gorgeous. It's got servants, it's got gardens, it's got stables, it's got a boat down on the lake. And we hear that the islands in the lake on the other side of the lake used to belong to the family, but they don't anymore. They've been sold. So we get this impression of grandeur that is decaying. This whole story feels full of grandeur and decay and change. There's a lot of change. I have to say that while Tanith Lee, or at least the door book, claims that it's Scandinavia, it felt very, very Russian to me. I imagine the chateau as the kinds of chateau that Russia built on the lakes of the Baltic around Finland, and I've stayed in a couple of those. They're phenomenal. Anyhow, that's how I imagine them. Victor doesn't want to be staying there. He wants to be back in the city, with the bars open late at night, with the gambling, with the dancing, with the drinking. He is bored there. There's nothing to do. He doesn't know anyone. His mother and his uncle engage mostly in reminiscing about what it was like there when they stayed there when they were young. And Victor doesn't want to be there. He begs his mother at one stage to let him go back to the city, and she says, no, you'll fall in with gambling, and you'll have debts, and you'll get drunk like your father did. And Victor remembers his father unfavorably. Father died when he was young, but it sounds like that is indeed exactly what his father was like. Victor's really too young to be anything. He's just a young man. I think he is 20. I think he keeps telling his uncle that he's 20 or 21 when his uncle keeps calling him 18 or 19. And Victor's leaning heavily on the brandy and the wine to get him through the boredom. He begs his mother to send him to Paris, where he's always wanted to go, but no, that's not an option either. And so he's basically moping through life, bored and sick of everything. And then one day, he's down by the lake, standing under a willow tree, and he sees a beautiful girl. I think it might have been midnight. May have been nighttime. He sees this beautiful young girl with blonde hair swimming naked in the lake. And he hides so she can't see him, and he's fascinated and slightly obsessed. So at some stage, he takes out a boat and he goes to one of the islands from which he's heard sounds of music coming once. And he finds an old, and again, this is nighttime, again, maybe about midnight. And he goes to this island, and there's this old decaying wooden house, and there's a cupola, and there's again this huge sense of decay and things left behind. And someone calls to him from the window, and it's the young girl. She's fully dressed this time, all in white dress, stockings and shoes, and she lights a lamp and she comes down and invites him in. And he doesn't initially want to go in, but he does eventually. She pours him a cup of tea and they sit there looking at each other, not conversing. He never asks her name. Eventually, he recovers from his social embarrassment enough to try and have a conversation, but he can't. Her responses are non-existent or discombobulating. They're out of sync with what seems to be happening, and eventually he gets up and tells him that he's going to go now. And she's told him that her uncle's away. You're going to go now. At the door, he says in a conventional way, perhaps I can come back. And she goes, no, no. And that's it. It's a strange, eerie, or something here is very weird sensation, quite aside from the midnight aspect. Anyway, Victor goes back to the chateau, and we find out that he realizes he's falling in love with her, not so much because he's actually in love with her, but because he's so bored and there's nothing else in his life, and that's just there. He's sitting on the lawn one day, and this man dressed in a peculiar black uniform suit, that's it, a heavy suit, comes up to him and tells him to leave his niece alone and not to go back to the island, or he will beat him up, sort of thing. The next night, Victor gets drunk and confrontational and sulky, and he gets into the skiff again. We never find out how the uncle got to the main land to talk to Victor, but he gets back in his skiff. He rows back to the island, and he peeks in through the blinds to find the man schooling the girl on how to talk, how to make conversation about things. Now, a lot of interpretation in the few places that actually talk about the story goes into what Victor actually observes, but all Victor really observes is this Svengali type moment where the man is trying to force the girl into representing an accurate conversation that is like a human. She doesn't seem to be human, and you have to wonder if she is. Now, she does spot Victor peeking in through the blinds, and she drops a line, and the man goes into this spiel, is this why I bought you from the slums, starving, skinny, covered in sores, etc., etc. But whatever he is doing or he isn't doing, it's only implied, and all we can really see is this person who isn't really interacting in any way like a person. Is she a real girl? Is she a bit slow? Is she an android? Is she an alien? We don't know. We've got no idea what this is, except that it's odd. Now Victor, being drunk, trips over something on the way out. He gets beaten up by the man. He escapes across the lake. A swan attacks him at some point, and we're left with this constant hints of swans there, but the swans don't necessarily have any connection with the guy and this woman on the lake. We keep thinking that they will be, but there keeps not being. Anyhow, Victor and his mother and uncle go back to town, and he lives his life. He becomes an author. He eventually goes to Paris. He's not really interested in things. It's like his engagement with the world slipped out of him around about the being beaten by this strange man in a heavy black suit. And there's a lot of things that people are saying. They're saying that Victor's thinking of seducing the woman, but that is not even implied. That is something that we take into the story. Virtually every human interpretation of the girl or Victor, their relationship, or anything that's happening is an implication that we take into that story from our experience, because Tanith isn't giving you anything except such an odd void that you are there to fill it. I do like this. It will not be for everyone. About 15 years later, he sees a woman in a park, and it's instantly in his home city, which I don't believe is ever named. He sees a woman in the park and instantly knows that it's her. She's warm, lushly dressed, and she's walking a little dog in the park. He goes over and has a conversation with her, and eventually she invites him back to her place. And again, it's odd because she doesn't seem to recognize him. He recognizes her. At one point, he realizes that she hasn't changed a bit in the 15 years. She looks exactly like she did 15 years ago. She invites him back to the place. She gives him all these cues for him to engage in a seduction. But every time he misses a cue and says something different, she just stands there smiling blankly until he gets back on track, the track that's been given. They eventually end up in the bedroom, and at the point where she's just wearing a silken shift and a hat, he insists she take off the hat, and he finds to his horror that her blonde hair is completely black. At that point, a man, uncle, smashes through the door and starts to engage on the insulted uncle has found someone seducing his niece routine. And Victor finally says, look, he drops a couple of hints like about the fact that he'd seen this all being curated, being Svengali'd back on the island, but the uncle doesn't pick up on any. And finally Victor says, look, I know what you're doing and I'm not going to pay you anything, and he leaves. The ending to this story is that a day or two later, someone finds him in a dark alley, beats him virtually to death, and the final scene is him lying on his deathbed with his mother, trying to talk him back. So it's a weird, tragic story, and it bears not even really a superficial resemblance to Swan Lake, except, as I mentioned, there is a lake, and there is a swan. What else there isn't is any explanation. Tanith never really holds your hands in books. You have to swim along with it and understand it from your own perspective. But here she does that even more so. There is no explanation for any of the things you want to know. How is the girl not aged for 15 years? Why is her hair a different colour? Why does this colour difference shock Victor so unutterably? What exactly is happening throughout? We don't know any of this stuff. It's left there hanging in your brain like a tantalizing, unsettling moon over a midnight lake. Anyhow, I love Tanith Lee's writing, and I love this story. It's probably one of the most obscure ones and the least explained ones in this collection. But if you like her writing, I do recommend it. If you find some Tanith Lee that you've read difficult, you will probably find Black as Ink difficult as well, because most of the subtext has to come from you. So thank you for watching this. I'm going to post a couple more short stories. I've nearly finished this collection. I will be reviewing Paid Piper, the first one in this book, and discussing it with Chris and Rob. And thank you for watching. Read good books.